Good evening and thanks for staying with us. Welcome to our COVID-19 update at this hour. I am Ladi Akiri-Duluale. Here are the highlights. Federal government insists complete compliance with guidelines is critical for COVID-19 containment, extends ease of lockdown phase 1 by 2 weeks. Minister of Foreign Affairs confirms CBN and NNPC will share in the costs of quarantine of evacuees from outside the country. And the leaders of France and Germany propose a 500 billion euro recovery fund for the continent. On the 4th of May, a gradual easing of lockdown measures in the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, Lagos, and Ogun states began. On that Monday, the usual frenetic streets of Lagos, largely empty during the lockdown, were busy again with cars, buses, and motorized tricycle taxis. Despite rules banning groups of more than 20 people and stipulating that individuals remain at least 2 meters apart, large groups of people often gathered by the road waiting for public transport. Social distancing rules were largely ignored. The story is not different in the Federal Capital Territory, but the Ogun State government decided to extend its lockdown by another 3 weeks. As it stands, the number of confirmed cases, according to the Niger Center for Disease Control, has increased from 2,802 on May 4 to 5,959 on May 16, representing more than a 110% increase in almost 2 weeks. The decision to ease restrictions follows similar steps taken in other nations in Africa. South Africa, earlier on this month, relaxed one of the world's strictest COVID-19 lockdowns, and Ghana last month lifted a 3-week lockdown in its 2 main cities. Now, with the extension of phase 1 of the lockdown based on substantial non-compliance across the country being extended yet again, we'll be taking a look at the link between awareness and compliance and how possible it is to improve on this in the next 2 weeks. But first, our stories of the day. The federal government today extended the gradual easing of the lockdown in Lagos, Abuja, and Ogun states by 2 weeks till the 1st of June. Chairman of the Presidential Task Force on the Coronavirus Pandemic and Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Mr. Boss Mustafa, made this known during a press briefing in Abuja. According to him, Nigeria is not yet ready for the full opening of the economy. He also lists efforts that must be taken to curb the spread of the virus nationwide.
Has approved the following. 1. The measures, exemptions, advisories, and scopes of entities allowed to reopen under phase 1 of the eased lockdown shall be maintained across the Federation for another 2 weeks, effective from today, 18th May, until the 1st of June 2020. 2. Intensifying efforts to tell, communicate, trace, identify, and test manage cases. 3. Elevating the level of community ownership of non-pharmaceutical interventions. And 4. Maintain the existing lockdown in Kano for another 2 weeks. 5. Imposition of precision lockdown in states or in metropolitan and high-burden local governments that are reporting a rapidly increasing number of cases when the need arises. This will be complemented with the provision of palliatives and continued re-evaluation of the impact of the interventions. And 6, aggressive scale-up of efforts to ensure that communities are informed, engaged, and participating in the response with enhanced public awareness in high-risk areas. Specific implementation guidelines will be communicated by the National Coordinator during this press briefing and will be circulated through the conventional and social media.
Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Boss Mustafa. Meanwhile, the Kaduna Mobile Court has convicted the renowned Islamic cleric Sheikh Yusuf Riga Chukun and his son for violating the quarantine order. The Commissioner of Justice and Attorney General of Kaduna State, Aisha Dikko, explained that in a statement that they were arrested at the Kaduna State University Junction for violating the stay-at-home order and were not wearing face masks. According to the Commissioner, the cleric and his son were fined 5,000 naira each and ordered to perform community service by informing the public on how to stop the spread of COVID-19. The statement adds that an army general was also arrested at the tollgate area of the Kaduna-Abuja Expressway. The army officer, who was in full uniform, was arrested while driving in from Abuja with 3 other passengers who had no face masks. While the general identified himself and explained he was on official duty, the court tried and convicted his 3 passengers. And over 2,500 violators of the lockdown order in Niger State have also been arrested by the police. Out of those arrested, over 2,300 have been prosecuted by mobile courts set up in the state. This violation of the orders have also prompted the task force on COVID-19 in the state to intensify monitoring of checkpoints to ensure enforcement of the order. Our correspondent, Emperor Simon, has that update.
The police in Niger State says it's not resting on its oars towards ensuring full adherence to the lockdown order by the Niger State government. Over 2,000 violators of the lockdown order have been arrested, according to the police command here in Niger State.
All in all, across Niger State, we have arrested about 2,532 persons, and about 2,360 persons have been prosecuted at our various mobile courts in Niger State. And some of the punishment that are made available for these violators, we have 6 months imprisonment or fine, 14 days in isolation centers, community services, escorting or returning whoever that we felt should be returned back to where they are coming from.
Meanwhile, the Niger State Task Force on COVID-19 has hit the road to monitor those who are responsible for enforcing the lockdown order as it goes from checkpoint to monitor the situation.
Many of them sometimes don't even know what they're supposed to be. Why are they at the checkpoint? Many of them do not know what are the measures that have been put in place and the restrictions. So from time to time, we educate them so that they will be able to use that, to reinforce, the compliance of the order.
Some individuals have been making concerted efforts towards contributing to the effort by the state government in containing the spread of COVID-19. Some young bike riders in the state under the name MX Riders have been going around to share face masks to security agencies. Currently, Niger State has 22 confirmed cases of COVID-19. The state government believes all hands must be on deck to tackle the menace. From Mina, Emperor Simon.
Thank you, Emperor. In keeping a tab on levels of compliance in the geopolitical zones, our correspondent Gimbar Umar in this next report finds out how compliance with established guidelines for the containment of COVID-19 is going in those zones.
From the far north, in Dutse, the Jigawa state capital, the streets says a lot. More people not complying with the safety guidelines of the government. COVID-19 a distant concern. Curiosity, however, gets the better of them on sighting our cameras. Getting on a bike here smacks of irresponsibility, but they don't seem to care. The warden is wary of commuters as he interrogates them, some outright stubborn. Children, unmindful of the dangers, scamper around with no masks. In Borno, northeast of the country, the relaxed lockdown will be extended according to the government.
It is very, very important, especially during this month of Ramadan, for Muslims to pray in their mosques.
Ilorin in the north central has its peculiar characteristics of complying with the guidelines for easing the lockdown. People gathered in clusters in front of the bank and public places. A hawker of face masks clearly in the center, a critical situation where the pandemic could prevail. One element, however, falls short.
Social distancing is a difficult thing to do, because our way of life and culture.
From Ilorin to Enugu, calm pervades the market. Here, some people wear their face masks, others don't. A group of adults loiters as others, more aware of the pandemic, keep a distance, some alone, even reading the papers for news. Red mini buses adorn the city centre in Uyo, the Akwa Ibom state capital. Social distancing here is an illusion. The hustle raises concern of a possible quick spread of the silent killer.
It is very necessary to comply because it's a pandemic, we have to comply.
In Lagos, the Berger area records the worst of experiences. It's a total disregard of social distancing. The enforcers and the enforced, all in a mix as the police try to arrest defaulters. Nothing seems to have changed from pre-pandemic period.
Compliance with the physical distancing is the real issue. If you are able to achieve that in public places, what happens with the buses and the transport and in the market?
While he speaks of social distancing as a solution, another says that the truth about the coronavirus must be unearthed.
Do we really have COVID-19 patients in Nigeria? I think these are the questions we should be asking ourselves.
The situation suits none, not even the birds, who appear to understand what social distancing means. With people just too many, the capacity to marshal them drops in Lagos. Gimba Umar, Channels Television News.
A level of polls were conducted today. The results of those polls were released in the course of today by the Minister of Information and Culture, Alhaji Lai Mohammed. Speaking at the PTF briefing in Abuja, Alhaji Mohammed pointed out that the polls were conducted by the NOI organization. And among other things, the polls reveals that the level of awareness across the country was now in excess of 99%, meaning that nearly all Nigerians were aware of COVID-19. 28% believed that they were immune to the virus in March, a number that dropped to 26% in April, a drop of 2%. On preventive measures, 91% of the respondents said they were aware of the various methods, including hand washing, use of facial masks, and social distancing. 87%, 85%, and 85%, an increase of 10% in March, an increase of 22%, and an increase of 43%. On stigmatization, 87% of the respondents in the month of March said they could work with people who have recovered from COVID-19. In April, that figure dropped to 78%. On the ease of lockdown, 95% say they had seen or heard adverts or any other types of information from government about COVID-19. 71% said they feel they are getting the information that they need from government. The federal government has been given more details on the aircraft it seized over the weekend. The Minister of Aviation, Hadi Sirika, gave the particulars of the aircraft as well as its operators at today's PTF media briefing. Senator Sirika further explained that his tweet over the weekend that the aircraft's seizure was owing to a breach of operational guidelines still subsists.
I want to apologize that when I tweeted that perhaps it was late in the afternoon and the fasting was biting harder. We refer to it as Flyer Aviation. And the correct name is Flyer Jet, and it's a UK registered company. They have an aircraft, the Legacy 600, and the registration number of the aircraft is G for Golf, P for Papa, R for Romeo, F for Foxtrot, and X for X-ray. That is the company registration, or the aircraft registration number. And their business address is a Business Aviation Center, Terminal Road, Birmingham International Airport, West Midlands. And the code is B for Bravo 26 3 Q for Quebec, and N for November. This company applied a couple of times, severally actually, to us to operate humanitarian flights, and which we did approve. And it is very, very clear at the beginning of this exercise. We define what those kind of flights should be. Essential flights, basically. Cargo, medical evacuation, medical supplies, and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, this company turned to become commercial in their service. They were charging money to fly people in and out. In the first place, we believe that the whole essence of a lockdown is to ensure that there is no movement of persons freely. Because this COVID-19 we're all here for, we're all spending sleepless nights for, happened because someone traveled and brought it in. So if you want to catch fish, empty the water. So we believe that by being the lockdown and stopping all these flights, with all of the consequences that it's bringing to us, is to prevent people from moving freely. So this shouldn't happen. Current status, we are investigating the matter right now. It will finish very soon. The pilots will be subjected to 14-day quarantine at the moment while investigation goes on. The aircraft is impounded in Lagos.
Meanwhile, the Foreign Affairs Minister, Geoffrey Oyama, has announced that the Central Bank of Nigeria and the Nigeria National Petroleum Corporation, the NNPC, have offered to fund the accommodation, feeding, and other costs needed for the quarantine of Nigerian evacuees from abroad. Giving an update at the daily PTF briefing today, the minister says the earlier decision to ask evacuees to cover the costs was because of a lack of funds.
I got in touch with the governor of the CBN and used as much persuasive charm as possible to get him over, and told him that I was going to do the same with NNPC, with the GMD of NNCC, Mele Kyari. And the governor of the central bank very generously, very kindly, and agreed that he said the amount that I was talking about, over ₦1 billion, because we have about 4,000 Nigerians out there, and if even 3,000 and something of them come back, the cost of accommodation, feeding, and everything else is over ₦1 billion that we don't have. And he said he was ready to explore and share the costs with CBN, with NNPC, and I spoke to the GMD of NNPC, and he said he was going to consult, and so kept fingers crossed. And thanks be to God, today he got back to me to say he was ready. He was going to meet up with the governor of the central bank, and that together they would fund this portion, a very, very important portion, the accommodation and feeding of evacuees.
When we come back after the break, we'll be taking a look at the issue of awareness and compliance and how to improve on it over the next 2 weeks. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back to our COVID-19 program. The nation's capital will maintain the current relaxed lockdown for the next 2 weeks, which means movement will be between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. when a curfew begins. This also means that interstate travel is restricted to essential services, and gatherings in places like clubs, restaurants, churches, and mosques are still banned for the next 2 weeks as well. In our next report, our correspondent Kayla Megwai examines compliance to the eased lockdown for the last 2 weeks in the nation's capital.
The total lockdown was eased mainly to ensure food security, and on the premise that no country can survive a total lockdown without the requisite palliatives for the citizens. The eased lockdown, however, came with conditions, and while we saw compliance to these conditions, many of them were broken in those 2 weeks.
The ones where they pay you, how much they pay you? 1.5 from Benin, you pack them. Zaria.
We saw people break the 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew.
They give us pass here, they send us, they should go and drop fertilizer.
Daily arrests following several people flouting the ban on interstate travel. And the issue of residents still holding religious gatherings on Fridays and Sundays led to several arrests.
Gathering is not good at all. We won't allow it, won't do anything, but we just pray that all of you try to understand. This will end. I want to go to my church.
Why are you afraid? The Bible says,
I am not afraid.
The person that does not have anything should be ruled as a lion.
I am not afraid. I am not afraid.
But they identify him as their pastor, those women, to me now.
If they are that means is that...
And they say they were sweeping mountains.
No, sweep away. Before God among them.
With steadily increasing numbers of people infected with COVID-19 in the country and low testing numbers, the ball is in the court of Nigerians to keep themselves safe, as the next few weeks will be crucial in Nigeria's war on COVID-19.
Kayla is in our Abuja studios and joins me now. Good evening, Kayla, and thank you for your time. Thank you for your reporting. Let me ask you, because you say the ball is now in the court of Nigerians to determine whether or not the next week. We have almost 6,000 cases now, 5,959, from just 2,800 at the start of this eased lockdown barely 2 weeks ago. Yet from your report, there are so many people, so many arrests, so many violations, so many violators. 2 weeks more, any changes possible?
Absolutely, Laddie. It's in the court of Nigerians, and I'll explain that. The reason is that personal responsibility is what is going to determine how well or how poorly, we do in the next 2 weeks. So while the government does what they can to make sure that there are palliatives around for a lot of people, trying to ensure that, people are safe, there isn't interstate travel going on, the people themselves who live in the nation's capital have to be able to observe these personal responsibility rules. So we're talking about no gatherings, and kudos to the people who lived in that area. They were the ones who actually called the task force and told them that there was a church service going on. Same thing happened with the mosque on Friday. They called and said, look, there's a service going on in so-and-so area. So I see a lot of people, yes, waking up to that responsibility. But yes, it will depend on how well we do as Nigerians. How mindful are we of these rules? Mr. Lai Mohammed was talking about a poll that he did where they found out that almost everyone knows what to do. If there's a lot of information out there on TV, on radios, on jingles, flyers. Everyone is doing what they can to put all the information out there. But adherence to these rules will be important for the next few weeks. We have to also take time to remind people, do you still wash your hands for 20 seconds? Do you remember to do that? Do you change your face masks regularly and things like that? So it will really, in very large part, depend on how Nigerians adhere to personal responsibility rules within this period, Laddie. The
other thing I would like to find out from you is, the Presidential Task Force has talked now that in the next, they said in the next 2 weeks now, they're going to be talking about a lot more enforcement of the guidelines. Your reporting seems to have revealed that that doesn't appear to be the case currently, and that enforcement without personal responsibility may not change anything.
Absolutely, Laddie. That is very true. Because enforcement would work if you have a tighter lockdown, right? Or if there's a full curfew, to be able to enforce these rules, you need the place to be on a total lockdown, but that's not what we have. We have an eased lockdown. So I think maybe what the task force will be doing is probably visiting places of business to see if they have, hand sanitizers, see if people have, if there's soaps, and things to wash your hands, if they're maintaining social distancing, check out the roster of businesses to see if everyone is showing up to work at the same time, and then look at interstate travel, which is a big issue that we're facing in the nation's capital here. You know, so they'll probably be trying to get all of those things. But no matter how much enforcement they put, first of all, we can't lock everybody up in jail. That would not help. The fines, 5,000 naira community service. But to get people to do the right thing, it depends largely on the people who live in the nation's capital, especially. How aware are you and how conscious are you of the things you need to protect yourself? It's possible for us, Ladi, to rehearse a life post-COVID-19, so to speak, but everybody has to get conscious of what the rules are and do what's necessary at this time. So more understanding from the people will be necessary, regardless of how much enforcement they try to put out there.
Thank you very much, Kayla, our correspondent Kayla there. Thank you for your reporting. Kayla joined us from our Abuja studios. Joining us via Skype is Dr. Tolu Olufunlayo from the Amuwo-Odofin area of Lagos. Good evening. Okay, I'm being corrected. That is actually Yaba in Lagos. Dr. Olufunlayo, thank you so much for your time. At this stage now, the assessment from phase one is that, look, compliance was nothing to write home about. What is there to say that in the next 2 weeks, anything is going to change?
Well, thank you. Good evening, viewers. In the next 2 weeks, we really do have a great task ahead of us. It's doable, but we'll have to really push ourselves very hard. You've been talking about awareness versus compliance on the show. For us to be able to get people to comply, they not only need to be aware, they need to have a buy-in into what we are talking about. When people hear about COVID-19, there's so many reactions they might have. So these people that are aware could deny it, they could be skeptics and, you know, tout so many theories. They could be complacent or they could be motivated. We need to get people to buy into being personally responsible. And the best way to do that is to engage them bottom up. Get them through people that they trust so that they actually take the message and act on it.
I must ask, though, I mean, given the figures that came out today in the NOI polls that the Information Minister, Lai Mohammed, was quoting, that 99% plus people are aware of this. They say that virtually everybody they spoke to is aware of COVID-19, what you need to do to keep yourself safe from it. But that has had very little impact on the compliance. So when you say engagement from bottom up, awareness is not the problem, it appears now, going by this poll. It is a question of people seeing the importance of complying. How do you make someone see the importance of complying with something that is in his own interest?
Well, that's the point I'm making, that, you see, it's a good first step that they are aware, but if they don't buy into it, if they don't see that they are protecting themselves and their loved ones, then there are so many reactions they might have. Let me use the example of the seatbelts. Even if we say we want to enforce compliance, and there's so much enforcement, which we do not have the resources to do, imagine someone wearing a seatbelt in his car, supposed to use a seatbelt. He only uses it when he sees the traffic warden because he doesn't want to get arrested. Not because he believes that if he has an accident, that seatbelt will help him. So in the same way, we must be able to speak the people's languages at their own level to make them understand that carrying out these measures is what will protect them, and that there's something in the first place that they need to protect themselves from.
Where do you stand on the issue of a national response? Because that's the other side of this. As the government is talking about easing the lockdown or continuing the slight easing of this lockdown phase one for another 2 weeks, you have state governments that are almost like lifting the cap on everything. People can resume going to markets, going to churches, going to mosques. They talk about the caveat of the rules and guidelines, but it's basically back to business as usual.
Well, I think today the PTF did say that if states, adhered to the pillars of the easing of the lockdown, i.e., the public health measures, physical distancing, and so on and so forth, then they were all right if they, had their own variations. But I think it's also a matter of engagement. If some states go, out of the way, then I think it should be pointed out to them. But by and large, I think every state is interested in the health of its people. And I'm sure that they would, even if they, go out of line in the beginning, they'll be able to look at it, assess it, and then retweak and, try and make sure that everything goes.
The interstate travel ban is the other thing that's been extended for 2 weeks, other than the curfew. The interstate travel ban, Kayla's reporting from Abuja just reminded us of the fact that in spite of that travel ban, people are moving back and forth, arrests are being made. But when we talk about community transmission, it is all these people moving back and forth and moving from one location to another who may be largely responsible. Again, is it a question of lack of engagement in that case, especially when you find people hiding under livestock in trucks, knowing fully well that they're not supposed to be in those trucks?
It's really quite a serious matter. We hear that people pay very, very large amounts of money to be smuggled in these cars. And one wonders really what the motivation would be. Because if it is economic, then I don't think they'd be able to afford to pay that much. So I would say that, well, this is one of the areas where enforcement would really be, very necessary to be able to mount guard at these interstate borders to ensure that people largely do not move around from state to state. But again, we still have to make people understand the reason why only essential outings should be done at this time. Remember, we are still in a lockdown. It is just that it has been eased. And this is only the first phase. This is one of the reasons why we haven't even been able to go into the second phase. Rather than us moving around, what we need to do now is to sit down. Every sector needs to plan how they are actually going to resume when the lockdown is fully eased. Because without that, we will find out that we will not be able to curb transmission, we'll not be able to stop transmission, and this curve will not flatten. So let's focus on the important things right now. Every Nigerian needs to take responsibility for their health in this pandemic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tolu Olufunlayo, consultant public health physician, who joined us via Skype from Yaba, Lagos. Thank you very much for your time. Now let's bring you the very latest in terms of what's going on with the website of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, the NCDC. And it fully displays the total number of confirmed cases in Nigeria and the country as at May the 17th, which was yesterday. In 34 states plus the Federal Capital Territory, a total of 5,959 confirmed COVID-19 cases have been recorded, with 1,594 patients discharged and 182 deaths recorded, bringing the number of active cases to 4,183. A breakdown of the figures by region shows that Lagos in the southwest still has the highest number of cases with 2,550, followed by Kano in the northwest with 825. In the north central region, the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, holds the third highest figures in the country with 418. Bauchi and Borno states have the highest cases in the northeast with 215 each. Edo leads in the south-south with 95, and Enugu in the southeast with 12 cases. I have with me in the studio another public health physician, Dr. Tony Adewole. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming in.
Good evening.
The 2-week extension of phase 1, it's a bit complicated. The 2-week extension of phase 1 of the easing of the lockdown, did it come to you as a surprise?
Not quite. It didn't come to me as a surprise because the first phase, the first 2 weeks of the first phase, what we hoped to achieve was not fully achieved because we saw reduced compliance. We didn't have enough compliance among the citizens of Nigeria. We saw our banks and markets. We didn't have the full compliance. Even businesses did not. It's either they didn't understand the guidelines or they didn't. They just did not abide by the guidelines. So it didn't come as a surprise that we had to extend and have another 2 weeks of this first phase, such that we can get structures in place. We can actually try to enforce more compliance and make people understand and see reasons why they need to comply, so that we can quickly move on to phase 2 and eventually phase 3.
Let me ask you what I asked Dr. Olufunlayo. 99+% of Nigerians, going by the NOI polls quoted by the federal government earlier today, are aware of COVID-19. So we can safely say virtually everybody has heard of it. But that has had very minimal impact on the level of compliance, even going by what you say. Do you agree with Dr. Olufunlayo that it's a question of engagement, that we haven't engaged, that those in authority, those with the information, haven't engaged the people enough, and therefore the people are acting on one side, the government is on the other?
Oh, yes, I totally agree with her. People are aware. It's no more. COVID is not a new term. Everybody now knows about COVID, which is a good thing, meaning engagements with the public has actually yielded a lot of results. However, people are not practicing what they are aware of. So it could be based on so many confounders. We are now having a new shift into having another sector of people who are having like a form of mistrust or distrust in the system. We are now having the group, they are aware quite all right, but they are doubting what they know or the information they hear. They are now, they've tilted to the other side of doubt, and they're like, is there actually COVID in Nigeria? We're not seeing the patients, we're not seeing anything. So this has gotten people a bit lethargic, and so they are no longer abiding or taking the safety measures or the precautionary measures as serious as you would have actually expected. So they are aware, but compliance level is still low. So we need to constantly engage them, media outfits, motorized campaigns, to still let them know the benefits of some of those precautionary measures. Even if it's fine, it's COVID today, but we have more infections that are actually out there, which you need to constantly protect yourself from. So you need to actually adhere to some of these measures.
Do you think enforcement is part of the problem?
Enforcement usually should be left to the last resort. So initially, when you're trying to get behavioral change, it starts with communication, adequately communicating to the person you're trying to get to change their behavior. And communication is a two-way thing. So you're getting the feedback from them. In as much as you're telling them what to do, you're explaining why they need to do this, you get their feedback on some of the obstacles or some of the hindrances that is not making them actually comply with this thing before you now resort to enforcement. Because if you go to enforcement directly, you're already bringing up you're coming on strongly on them. And if they don't see reason why they need to comply with some of these things, your enforcement will be met with a lot of resistance. So I believe that enforcement should be left to the last resort. If we've tried all means possible and we're still not getting results, then yes, we might now have to go to enforcement.
Going forward, 2 weeks extension of this phase 1. In some other countries, when the easing started, they always emphasized the fact that depending on what the figures tell them, they could go back to complete lockdown. We didn't have that provision. So we, to some extent, is responsible for this easing and the extension. What do we have to do now to either convince ourselves that this is a serious issue, or to ensure that we don't have an extension of this phase of the lockdown?
In order not to have an extension of this phase, it's actually simple. Why we're having a repeat 2 weeks of this first phase is because the government or health authorities were not satisfied with the level of compliance. So we want to see more compliance from everybody's part. Individuals, the community, corporate organizations. Another thing that can hinder compliance is if the right structures are not in place. For example, if we take the example of what happened in the banking halls initially, because the customers came, you did not clearly mark out where each person was supposed to stand, you had a crowd. So organizations right now should start coming up with structures. Let people get there and meet the structures on ground. There's a tendency that even before you try and hammer on them, they fall into line based on what is already on ground. So we need to go back, we need to think, we need to plan. Organizations need to plan, market leaders need to plan. How can we continue? Because by the time you're hoping for the next phase, which includes more businesses opening, longer hours and all. So you need to come up with a plan. Luckily, Lagos State has come up in conjunction with the Safety Commission and LASEPA with a guideline in which for businesses to reopen, you need to apply, they come and assess and see measures that you have put in place. So people need to start thinking, what can I do such that I can operate my business in this new COVID era, such that I'm COVID compliant in quotes. So what are the things you need to do? What are the things you need to put in place? By the time government is satisfied with all this, then we can comfortably move on to the next phase of the easing of the lockdown.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tony Adewole. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's been a pleasure having you here. When we come back after the break on our COVID-19 update, we'll take a look at what's going on outside our shores, including that 500 billion euro recovery fund proposed by the EU. Thanks for staying tuned. South Africa is witnessing a spike in the number of confirmed cases of coronavirus, just as the country prepares to shift from level 4 to 3. The country has 16,433 confirmed cases at the last count, more than half of whom are from the Western Cape province, and a countrywide death toll of 286. The government has been criticized by several groups and even a member of the Government Advisory Council for the handling of different aspects of the anti-COVID response. Here's Betty Dibia with more.
Thank you, Ladi. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has strongly defended his government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic in the country, saying that everything that's been done has been in good faith and for the well-being of the people. This as several court cases have been brought against the government, challenging the constitutionality of the lockdown, as well as the authority of the National COVID Command Council in the country. Meanwhile, as the country gears up to shift from level 4 to level 3 lockdown, the number of confirmed cases in the country has crossed 15,000, jumping as much as 1,160 between Saturday and Sunday. The Western Cape province remains the epicenter of the spread of the virus in the country, contributing as much as over 60% of the total country's tally. While the government tries to figure out why they're having the high numbers, the Health Minister, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, says more resources will be deployed to these regions. The strategy, he says, is to improve primary health care by splitting the communities into clusters with multidisciplinary healthcare teams stationed in those areas. We asked Professor Mariki Fenter of the Center for Viral Zoonosis at the University of Pretoria if these high numbers will peter out soon enough.
So with any outbreak, you will have an initial phase where people start to get infected, and then, as the outbreak increases, we talk about the epidemic curve, more and more people will get infected. But then as people become healthy again, or they get antibodies to it, you will get what you call herd immunity, and the outbreak will cease or go down. The problem, as we said, with this virus, because there are people that's asymptomatic that may not know that they are infected, the chance is that this can continue longer, and that's why you have a longer time that you also try to do this isolation to make sure that it's the country is clear again of the virus.
President Cyril Ramaphosa, as the chairman of the African Union, was also part of the World Health Assembly, which began today, where he called for more collaboration in dealing with this global challenge.
The pandemic has highlighted the dangerous and growing inequality that exists between countries and within them.
He also appealed for more support for struggling African countries through debt relief, special drawing allocations from global financial institutions, and the provision of comprehensive stimulus packages. Back to you.
Thank you, Betty. The leaders of France and Germany have proposed a European Recovery Fund worth 500 billion euros to help countries hit hardest by the coronavirus crisis. The proposed fund will be in addition to a huge loan package worth 540 billion euros set to be released through existing EU mechanisms from June the 1st. The new fund still requires approval by all 27 member states to be launched. Meanwhile, the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, has promised an independent evaluation of the global coronavirus response, that it will be launched as soon as possible. According to the WHO, not everything you hear about COVID-19 is true. It's launched a campaign about countering misinformation on the virus in several countries. On its website, you can find regular updates about the spread of the pandemic. The COVID-19 strategy on their website guides the public health response at national and sub-national levels, including practical guidance for strategic action tailored to the local context. You can also take a closer look at some of the numbers in real time. Our website, channelstv.com, has more updates. You can find the latest on the pandemic in Nigeria and from across the world, plus other stories. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale. Good night.